All right, so this episode's going to run a little differently. I'm actually pretty careful about not speaking on a topic unless I'm pretty well read on it, pretty well researched on it. So you'll notice when on the last episode, episode 25, with Jay Bolger, who is the documentary filmmaker behind the Netflix documentary Counterpunch, which follows a kid as he literally fights his way out of poverty in New York City and gets a pro boxing contract. Jay talked about his next documentary, which has to do with skateboarding in Iran, and I had very little to say about Iran because I just said, hey, I haven't read about that, I haven't researched it, I'm just not going to talk about it. We're pretty much in the same boat here. I don't feel like I have a lot to say about the transgender troops issue, and there's going to be people that push back immediately because I say that I have no responsibility outside of the actual people in my life, right? Like, my responsibilities, because I'm not that important, probably end within miles of where I actually live. And I'll get into that in the episode, but I want to talk about why I said that before we kick this thing off, okay? And we've actually got to talk about the Avengers to do that. So Chris Hemsworth, Thor, who I love, I think he's a fantastic actor for the kind of roles he plays. He came out and said that it's time for a female James Bond, which for the record there is. The new movie Atomic Blonde, which opens today actually, is getting all kinds of reviews that says, hey, here's the female James Bond. This is why that's a stupid statement, though. James Bond is James Bond, and the fact that James Bond is a male is part of what makes the character what he is, right? I would love to see a black James Bond. Idris Elba is supposedly in contention to be the next Bond, and I think he's a great actor. I think that would be fantastic. Here's what Chris Hemsworth did. It's called virtue signaling. It's just like, well, I need to say something that sort of seems progressive and social justice-y, even if it doesn't make sense. And I reject that completely. So if you want to come back at me on Twitter and say, oh, well, you say you have no responsibility to the trans community because you don't know anybody in the trans community, and therefore you don't care if trans people commit suicide, that's not the case at all. Okay, I just wrote a piece about Chester Bennington's suicide, the singer of Linkin Park, for Relevant Magazine this week. I don't want to see anybody commit suicide. But if I don't know somebody, I can't be involved in their lives. And statistically, I'm in a city of 100,000 people. There may not be one trans person in the city. We're talking about 0.3% of the population. And so I reject this idea that doing the Chris Hemsworth thing and coming out and saying that some just sort of progressive-y statement actually helps anybody. And by the way, I'm still totally seeing Thor Ragnarok. I'm not even upset with him necessarily. I just wanted to point out that I don't think that actually gets any good in the world done. And, the show is called Neighbors again, so my primary responsibility needs to be to, my actual neighbors. Hey, just two more notes before we get into this. I know it's a bit of a long intro, but the first thing is I found another essay from kind of a different point of view that I want to read to close out the episode. And this is really one where you're just supposed to take the evidence and do what I hope you always do with this podcast, which is think through an issue, and wherever you land, hopefully land somewhere intelligently and well thought out, and second of all, feel like you can understand the other side of where somebody's coming from. And the last thing I want to point out, just as an observation that I was chewing on this morning, is that the federal government will accept somebody into the military who requires a $130,000 operation, but absolutely will not accept people like me, which is somebody with a peanut allergy. That is an absolute disqualification. And I just thought that was curious. I think that's worth wrapping your head around, because peanut allergies are not a sexy topic. It's not trendy to stand up for people with peanut allergies, and so there's no accommodation. I talk about another medical reason I couldn't get in the military after 9/11, but even if I didn't have that, there's no accommodation whatsoever for my condition, and I just find that to be very curious. And not even necessarily as it relates to the transgender thing, but just what we will and won't work around as a society. All right, Kyleann Hunter, Former combat helicopter pilot, Marine, current PhD candidate, very fascinating, funny, and a great human being to spend an hour-long conversation with. My name is Seth Towerherd. Let's be neighbors again.
And if we can't walk in love, we're a noisy little gong, a bitter little song that a bully sings out of key. And if we can't walk in peace, we'll forget about the least of these. A mother crying on her knees for a boy who's locked away. There's a voice calling me.
I'm just going to start recording. We're going to come in with us laughing. Oh, now we have to say it. So we were talking about you have a corgi, and this woman in my apartment building has a dingo, which was born in the wild in Australia. And I said, I'm like the biggest dog lover ever, but the dingo ate my baby thing came from a couple in Australia that went to prison for murdering their baby, and it turns out a dingo really ate it. So I don't know, I'm 6'6", so I hope dingoes don't eat bigger things. Probably.
I think you're pretty safe from the dingo eating you, but maybe you could have the dingo ate my big toe. And we can start a new.
Okay.
If you get really drunk and are passed out for a long time and you're like, the dingo ate my big toe.
So if you made it through the first 90 seconds. Kyleann Hunter is 11-year Marine. It was Marines, right?
Marines,
Corps.
Yep.
Marine Corps veteran.
Marine Corps Cobra pilot, and I was also the legislative liaison to the House of Representatives, in particular around the time when we were repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Okay, and you are a PhD candidate now.
Yes.
What made you? So you did a lot. You said you didn't plan on this as a career. It just kind of seemed like an adventure because you were bored. You stayed in for 11 years. Why did you stay?
Well, one of it was the timing during Iraq and Afghanistan when we were deploying quite a bit, and so getting out was never really convenient. Then I got offered the opportunity to go be the Marine Corps' legislative liaison officer at the House of Representatives, as well as that followed a congressional fellowship that I had as a Marine, and that was an opportunity that was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime thing, where I got to go serve with a member of Congress in their office for a year and actually see how the legislative process happens in particular with regards to changes to military policy, and then also serve as the Marine Corps' legislative liaison officer. So really the point person for all of these legislative changes that happened for the military. Of note, it was during the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was clearly not contentious at all.
Wait, that wasn't. I thought that was during the 90s. No.
No. Well, so Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented in the 90s. So that's when the policy was created, and that was back in 92 when there was a whole controversy around whether or not homosexuals should be able to serve, and so they came up with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was basically It was a middle
ground, basically.
Right. We won't say you can't serve, you just can't tell anybody, and nobody can ask you, so you can kind of serve as long as you don't do anything that might be gay-ish, which is a really weird way of crafting a policy. That's basically you can serve as long as you aren't you, which is kind of weird. So then finally they repealed it in 2012, and it went away, and so then it allowed homosexual service members to serve openly, and that was no longer a barrier for service. It was also the time when they were conducting the study on women in combat and whether or not women should be able to serve in ground combat units. Clearly another completely non-contentious issue that was coming up. And so it was really my time there that led me to grad school and wanting to study further why do militaries and democracies make changes to their personnel policies, and what sort of international impetus, domestic impetus leads to militaries making personnel changes, especially in democracies, because clearly we could fight with an army of just white men. I mean, we did it for a long time here and in a lot of other countries, but we've made decisions to do that for what I would say for the better for our national security.
Okay. And you're now, you said you've done some research around this for your PhD work.
Yes. Yes.
Where are you trying to go then? If you're doing something in international relations, are you trying to go overseas again, or what is this?
No, professorship. I'd like to stay in academia, particularly in a policy relevant school, because I think that there is definitely a place for academics, especially academics who have had experience in a field, to be able to do.
Which is not enough of them in anything.
No, there's not. No, there's not. But to be able to do independent research that's not necessarily government sponsored, that's not a think tank sponsored, but that is on their own, because you want to get to the root and the bottom of a question. And that place for independent research is really important. And I'll say, I've found things in my research around the expansion of roles to women that went against kind of what my gut first thoughts would be based on my experience. And so I think it's really important to have people who are willing to say like, oh, hey, I was wrong about this issue because I found data and evidence that, opposite of what I thought. And I also think it's important to study a lot of these issues in a broader international context, especially, with regards to our NATO allies, other Western democracies, because we, as a military, we go off and fight with these guys all the time. And we should kind of have a good understanding of how each other's militaries work.
Yeah. Okay. Just a little bit more groundwork, and then let's get into the main topic. Okay. So you were a pilot.
Yes, I was a pilot.
Okay. Fighter pilot. I guess I'm not familiar with the aircraft.
So I flew the Cobra, which is an attack helicopter. So we say that we're like better than fighter pilots because we can both fly helicopters and shoot things. And here's
the thing. I don't have any fear of commercial airline travel or anything. I don't ever want to be in a flipping helicopter. I just don't. They fall out of the sky all the time for no reason.
Well, they're really just so ugly that the earth repels them. Like that's the magic that keeps them flying.
Okay, so one of my friends, his dad was fireman, and they had this a car goes into a car went in the Chicago River, and it takes a while. You have a few minutes to get the person out and save their life because it takes a while for the car to fill up with water, right?
Yep.
They get a couple of people out, in the air in 3 minutes after the call comes in, going to save these people in the Chicago River. Choppering in, divers go down, supposed to save them. Stupid helicopter just crashes for no reason.
I mean, gravity's kind of a reason, right?
I just mean... they're a fire department. Nobody's shooting at them. It just fell out of the sky. I just don't want to be in these things. I don't like them.
They don't have great aerodynamics when that happens either.
Okay.
So they don't, they just they don't glide. That was when I was in primary and I was learning to fly, that was always like my biggest freak out. I was like, oh, I just come from flying airplanes where we did drills where we cut the engines off and we just glided the airplane down to the ground. We get into helicopters and it's like, ha, suckers, you're going to crash.
Okay, one more stupid story, and then we really got to be serious. But I think this is worth it for the audience. One of my great aunts was afraid to fly. Got her pilot's license to get over it. Flew under an interstate bridge in the 1970s and was interrogated by the FBI as a terrorist.
That's pretty much one of the most awesome stories ever. I mean, both just that you're going to go to the lengths to get your pilot's license to get over your fear of flying, and then you get
that was it. She never flew again. They were like, yeah, you're and they didn't believe in me because she was 50 something. So I don't think that they believed that she was just that much of a daredevil at that point in her life, and she was. And then she had it taken away. Okay, I want to actually. I think my personal background of why I wasn't able to get in the military for physical reasons may apply here. And then one other question about the Marines. So, I have an extra rib that runs we're on video. This will be audio, but it runs it ends up here. So it's it's down by my free-floating ribs, and it's around my shoulder. It is an extra thoracic rib is an automatic disqualification. I turned 18 in. I was 18 going into 9/11. I was 18 years old. So everybody else, I at least checked it out. I was told by a doctor when I was a kid that there was no way. The other thing is I have a life-threatening peanut allergy, which is also an automatic disqualifier. because
there's a lot of peanut butter and MREs.
Yeah, you can't eat the food, so you're just like out. I mean, so that's, first of all, if I haven't said it so far in the recording, thank you for your, anytime we have somebody on, thank you for your service. There was just no way, my family fought in the American Revolution, through kind of everything, all the way through World War II. And then my mom and uncle's generation was a little too young for Vietnam. So it kind of skipped a generation there. But I certainly did not have, there was no waiver, no way I was ever going to get in. But, like everybody else, it seemed like with, right after 9/11, I looked at it and they just said, no.
Yeah, a lot of people certainly. Yeah, were in that boat. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've had like people occasionally in my life be like, oh, you made that up about the extra rib. I'm like, you can see it.
Yeah, that's not something you want to like live with either.
You can see it. I mean, and the issue is if I break it, they're afraid I would have, I could bleed out my, sever an artery and bleed out. So that's why I can't go through basic training and do hand-to-hand combat and fall off walls. So that's, that's what it is. So that's as I think some of this pertains. First of all, you talked about women in combat. So every Marine is first and foremost a rifle operator, correct? Even though you were
correct.
Private?
Correct. Yes. I mean, that's very much the Marine Corps ethos side of things. Every Marine or rifleman is sort of the creed that goes along with everything. And on the officer side, what I went through is that all Marine Corps officers go through what we call the basic school, which is essentially basic infantry training. And all enlisted Marines go through what's called MCT, Marine Corps Combat Training. So all Marines, regardless of your gender or what your actual military occupational specialty ends up being, you go through a basic combat course.
Which we need to differentiate because you can go into like the Air Force and never be on a combat track or like.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, the Air Force, if you go through whether it's the Air Force Academy or OCS on the officer side and you're going to go be a pilot, you go straight from whatever your commissioning source is straight to pilot training without anything in between.
Okay, so I don't actually know where the lines are drawn as far as women in combat because you brought that up. So where has that changed over the last?
So it's a very interesting thing. So there was what they called back in the 90s. Again, they put in what was called the direct ground combat exclusion. Was the name of the policy. I mean, it has a big formal number title, but it's essentially called the direct ground combat exclusion, which prohibited women from being either assigned to units or co-located in units that had a great risk of experiencing direct ground combat. So that's basically infantry, tanks, and artillery at anything below the division level. So the reasoning behind it was that women can't go out and do the kicking down doors and shooting the bad guy stuff or be out in a tank. And there's a myriad of arguments for this that range from the physical, that women can't carry the amount of equipment that's required, or women can't withstand the ardors of going months without showering, whatever it is. There's the ridiculous physical arguments to the more sort of emotional arguments, I think, that go with it, that women can't kill people. Women won't be able to come face to face with somebody and actually kill them. Or on the flip side, the men in the unit would be too distraught if they saw a female fellow soldier, sailor, Marine, get killed, that they wouldn't be able to go on with their duties. And so that was really the arguments that happened. In 2012, the Department of Defense undertook a comprehensive review, basically looking at this and seeing like, okay, well, what is the, what's the rationale behind it? And I think especially in light of the fact that in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, for at that point, it had been over a decade, women had been leading convoys, and these convoys were getting ambushed, and they were getting attacked by IEDs. Women were in aircraft that were getting shot at and shot down and conducting combat missions in aircraft. And I'll tell you, like, the enemy doesn't care. The enemy's not saying, oh, well, you're a woman, so you're not supposed to be in direct combat, so I'm not going to attack your convoy. I mean, that's sort of a ridiculous, ridiculous concept.
Okay, I'm back. So
right.
Attack helicopter.
Yeah.
All right. So attack helicopter. Did this transport troops or this just?
Nope.
shots?
The only thing it did was shoot things. And so it's really hard to try to make this argument that, women just, there's something fundamentally women can't do. They can't shoot people. Well, we can. Newsflash here.
Well, there's probably a lot of criminal women in prison that could prove you can shoot people.
Right. Yeah. Or even kill them hand-to-hand combat. I mean, there's women in prison who've done that too. So in 2015, the ban was completely repealed, and it was said that, okay, anybody who's qualified can go through any sort of training, that, or can have any job. So that was the repeal that happened around women in the military.
Okay, so currently women can go out and kicking down doors in the Marines.
They can. We have female Marines made it through the enlisted infantry school. There haven't been any women who have made it through the infantry officer course yet, but we do have women in artillery and tanks, I believe, now as well. So there's been a few women who have tried to go through the infantry officer course, but that's a whole nother discussion as to why they haven't made it through. There are 2 women now contracted to go to the Naval Special Warfare School, one to BUDS, which is the beginning of the SEAL training, and another to be a special boat teams operator. And so they're in their initial stages of training right now. There's been a handful of women who have made it through Ranger training, and one in the Ranger Battalion in the Army. And so women are showing really that whether it's a physical or emotional response, that they're doing it just fine. And I think that one of the biggest testaments to this is that the people that they're serving with, the men who they're serving alongside, really don't have anything good, bad, negative to say about them that they wouldn't say about any of the other Marines or sailors or soldiers that they're working with. As long as they can do the job, it's kind of a non-issue.
Okay, so my only question around this, and it's not even specifically a gender-based question, but my only thought or concern is general infantry. I'm not, I don't really have any questions about the rest of it. All right, so I'm 6'6".
Yep.
I'm about 245. I mean, I'm fairly decent shape. I'm not super jacked. I'm not super fat. I'm just kind of average, right? I get gut shot. I want to be with somebody who can drag me out. And if a woman can drag me out, that's fine. I also wonder about this might seem harsh, but letting guys that are like 5'3" serve. I mean, selfishly, I want to get drug out and not bleed out with, holding my intestines. So
I wouldn't want you to either. And I think this is why it's important to have gender neutral standards, physical standards for these things. So if we're talking about the infantry, for example, on this, and getting through your initial infantry training, there need to be standards. There need to say you need to be able to drag X amount out of this sort of environment. On the flip side, people use arguments, well, maybe if you're like 6'6" and big, you're too slow, and you can't move as fast under fire. I mean, you've heard that argument as well. Like, should there be some sort of middle range of people? Like, and this was an argument.
I don't know. Do they reject people for being too big? I don't know.
In the aviation community, they do, which has more to do with fitting or the too big or too small, really. Another thing in the jet side, it's ejection seat capability. That if you get too big, they can't actually fire you out. But I mean, this is a kind of ongoing debate and ongoing question as to what that target should be, because there needs to be assurance that everybody within a unit can rescue everybody else. And so there should be a standard that is set to say you need to be able to do X amount, and pull that person out. And with that too, also needs to come, teaching proper technique to move people. I mean, something I think that was interesting when they were doing the studies, the Marine Corps in particular actually was doing the studies with the gender mixed combat units out in 29 Palms, was that they found that during the sort of buddy drag exercise in particular, the men would typically try to use brute force and just pick up guys and get them out. The women, who tended to be smaller, and again, we'll use sort of just general physiological traits here, they're smaller, they're a little hippier, more compact. They were able to carry much more weight, getting them heavier, kind of squared under their body and almost doing a squat. and picking them up and moving people that way. When they're doing evacuating casualties from the Humvees, for example, rather than just dragging them out, they would be able to prop them up and like do a squat and carrying them out on their back, carrying much more weight than sort of the traditional buddy carry.
Fireman's carry.
Fireman's carry that's taught. And so I think part of it too is also teaching the techniques, and some of this is the learning of things that are more efficient, that especially if you're already under load, are going to be more effective and more efficient for an individual to save their buddies, and they could do it faster. And I think that's the bigger thing too, was that, setting up for a fireman's carry takes some time to get somebody and making sure that you're not going to hurt yourself, and that, hurt yourself when you're actually picking up your buddy. And doing this, they were able to position their casualty much quicker, get them on their back faster, and carry them out more effectively. And so I think that it's in addition to setting a standard of saying, whether we say it's 200 pounds or 220 pounds, whatever it is that you actually have to be able to evacuate, but it's also, so many of these things are skill based. Yes, there is some natural instinct of like, what do you do under fire sort of thing, but there's also things you just have to teach people, and it's learned muscle memory. Shooting's another one of those things. Shooting is a skill you need to teach, and there are people aren't born being great shots, necessarily. Like we can look at a lot of different components that would put somebody into being a better marksman than somebody else, but a lot of it's training, and it's technique based. And so we need to look at that, not just in things like shooting, but also in some of these physical skills that are going to be required to be an effective combat soldier, sailor, or Marine.
Okay. Let's get into the main topic. Let me just give you my take on what I think is going to happen, which is nothing. I really think that what this is about was the fact that the healthcare thing's not going well. So we did something.
Right. We needed to make some noise.
I also get driven crazy by the fact that this just does, and okay, you can take this as harsh or not, right? But as far as the consequential decisions we're making as a military, we decided to turn away 25,000 Afghani interpreters who Obama and Trump did not bring them over. Like that was in the crossover, right? Mm-hmm. Some of those people are going to get burned alive. Mm-hmm. And it can get actually burned alive in their villages. Some of them maybe get to, may be able to fly under the radar. Some may get to, there's a lot of Afghanis going to Thailand now as refugees. And we did the same thing in Vietnam. Part of my extended family are Laotian refugees. And so, the Hmong, here in Southeast Wisconsin, there's a bunch of Hmong, which are, an ethnic group with no country who fought on the part of the United States and were severely persecuted. I am way more interested in that subject, which is getting zero airtime for the fact that we left our allies to die, than I am in this. And part of the reason I'm not that interested, and it's funny because we're doing a podcast about it, I say I'm not that interested. Yeah. I think that nothing will happen. I think that this was just kind of I need something to talk about, so I'm going to tweet this out. You can jump in wherever.
Yeah. Well, so first I will say that I completely agree with you that what we have done to our Iraqi and Afghan interpreters, as well as all of the different groups who helped us in Vietnam, individuals in Bosnia when we were doing peacekeeping in Lebanon. I mean, the list goes on and on about our abuses of local talent, local manpower that we then just dump when things don't go our way. Somewhere.
Well, and if I can jump in just right there for a second, that after World War I, and it's interesting that the Middle East conflict looked different. Winston Churchill wanted to create a homeland for scattered Jews in Alaska. Because there was room, it was easy. It's a very interesting concept, right? Mm-hmm. We could have pulled 400,000 Hmong out of Southeast Asia, plopped them in Utah, and nobody would have even noticed. And the thing is immigrants are a bajillion times more likely to start a business and hire people. And looking at that culture around here, they're pretty hard workers and they start stuff and get stuff done. We could have absorbed basically an entire ethnic group and it wouldn't have been a big deal.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, on that part too, like I've been involved with an organization here in Denver, No One Left Behind. It's actually interesting. Like all of our wedding gifts went to them because we got married when we were old and didn't need anything like
Didn't
emerging
need stuff.
No, no. I mean, like we literally gave them a kitchen table. We were like, here, you new family. But I mean, their whole purpose is to basically pick up where the government has fallen short and ensuring that we're keeping the promise and bringing our interpreters back here with us. And this is something that absolutely we should be talking about this rather than tweets around tweets around transgender service members, which is a tongue twister to say, but it's I think that it gets, this was my personal take, this was a cheap shot at a lot of ways, but the most unfortunate side of a lot of it is that it's a tweet which happened for whatever reason, whether it was a distraction, which you hear people say, or it was just low-hanging fruit, or it was Trump woke up and had a bug up his bonnet against transgender people that day and wanted to do something about it because he can. The real downside is that it had very real consequences in people's lives who are currently serving. And, there are estimates anywhere from 2,500 to 15,000 currently active duty transgender service members right now. And because he's the president, when he sends a tweet like this, and there's been all this talk that like his tweets are now official statements from the president, it sends the military and not really necessarily the senior leadership, but it sends these small unit leaders, these staff sergeants, these captains who have the day-to-day interactive with these service members, it sends them into complete and utter, and what's most important, really unnecessary chaos. That they see these tweets and they're young transgendered, who are out now and who can serve out and openly. They now come to their staff sergeants, their captains, their majors, and say, like, what do I do? What's next? And it's taking time away from what our service members should be doing, which isn't trying to interpret tweets.
Okay.
And I think that's where this becomes the biggest issue, that it is taking away what is actually going to happen. I mean, I think that General Dunford's comment today that there's going to be no change as of now in the policy is important, but it puts him, the other, I think, dangerous, for lack of a better term, consequence of this is that now you have a president at odds with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense. And you're starting to, at some point, there's going to be a whole lot of kind of just confusion, lack of trust, lack of faith, and it's going to create some instability that is really unnecessary. You're going to have service members not knowing. I think that it's another sort of unfortunate. I don't really like this comparison, but I can't think of another one right now. When the travel ban was first announced, there was all this chaos at the airport where nobody knew, like, there are people literally stranded in terminals of like, can I go through customs? Can I not go through customs? Where do I go? You have TSA agents on the ground not knowing how to interpret anything. And it was sort of left to this piecemeal, there was just this chaos for a while of what do we do? What does this mean? Who does it impact? Who can we allow in? Who has to stay out? Where do we go? And you're now putting these young members of the military, and I think it most importantly, these staff sergeants and captains, in this position of trying to figure out what to do. Where they now have service members, trans service members who are out saying, "What am I going to get kicked out? What's going to happen?" And the other, I think, unfortunate side of it is that it's given some license to those who may hold beliefs that trans members don't belong in the military. And I think I would say from the trans members I have talked to, their immediate units are incredibly supportive. Because again, it's really hard to dislike somebody you fought against or fought alongside, not against, you fought alongside. That this is, and I think this is one of the reasons why even the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell went so smoothly, because everybody knew who the gay people in their units were. Most of them had been deployed multiple times with them, fought alongside them, worked with them through multiple deployments, through workups. And so they're like, well, regardless of what I think about gay people, like as this sort of concept and idea, like Bob or Jane are cool, like they saved my life. They worked with me. They got the mission done. So yeah, keep them in. I don't want them to be treated any differently. And from the small unit level, you see the same thing happening, I think, on the the day-to-day level of trans service members, is that they feel very supported by their units. They're just another soldier, just another Marine, just another whatever. The fear is that you're kind of opening this space for hate and isolation from the outside to happen. And you're saying that it's okay. It's okay to fear this, it's okay to fear them. It's okay to disparage them. It's okay to say they don't belong. And I think, what's more is that most of the anti-trans in the military sentiment isn't coming from inside the military. It's coming from outside of it. It's coming from people who have never served. And I think that says a lot too, where that the people who are saying, we're not going to have them in our military, like, they're not people who are serving with them day to day. Go ask the troops. And I mean, this is something that when I was working, on the Hill during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we'd get these civilian groups to come in and say, oh, it's going to destroy the military and it's all going to fall apart. I'm like, well, have you actually gone and talked to the Lance corporals or the first lieutenants or the sergeants who are serving with gay members? Well, no, they don't know what they're talking about. They're the ones who actually have to do it. Like they're the ones who are serving day to day with them. And if they're cool with it, maybe you should just not have an opinion about it anymore.
Okay.
That's where I see it becoming, a danger, is that you're kind of opening this space for a group being targeted from the outside.
So I'm going to jump in with a couple things. I'm going to throw some veteran stuff I found on social media at you, because okay, so at the most generous estimates, trans people are about 0.3% of the American population, right? Which comes out somewhere around 105,000 people. And I could totally be wrong here, but estimates of 15,000 actively enlisted. So that would have to be, almost 15% of the overall population. As a journalist, that's pretty hard for me to wrap my head around. And I could be wrong, but that's a very high number, just out of your last answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me personally, it sounds like a high number as well. I mean, those estimates come from, there's both a RAND study that was just recently done, as well as from two of the different activist organizations there. And that's what they put, the range of estimate is anywhere from 2,500 to 15,000. And I think that, which is a huge estimate. And I think that's a ginormous number of, and, as a social science researcher, I think that's a huge, just a huge range that makes things a little uncomfortable. But, even if it's at the small end, the 2,500 number end, those are still 2,500 people who raised their hand and said, like, I'm willing to die for this country, regardless of what my identity is. And in addition to that, 2,500 people who have proven that they are qualified and competent at their military occupational specialty, whether it is being a admin, officer, or, as in the case of, I think it's Logan, Ireland, a Marine infantry officer, or infantry staff NCO, staff non-commissioned officer.
Yeah, I'm not saying, obviously I'm not saying if it's only 2,500, it doesn't matter. But as a journalist, I'm not just going to take a number that, like, if it's 2,500, obviously it matters. We're doing a podcast episode.
Yes.
But I've been a writer for 15 plus years. I tend not to just, swallow a press release. All right. So the other thing I was going to say is, the vast majority, because we're talking about such a small percentage of the population, the vast majority of Americans probably will not cross paths with a trans person. And so I think what's interesting in the era of social media is that the more somebody is active on social media about something, the less likely they are to do something in real life. So the more you talk about something on social media, the less likely you are to ever volunteer an hour or give $10. And so, it's funny, like, okay, there's one element as an American, I have a responsibility to make sure that people aren't, hurt, their rights trampled on, whatever. The flip side of that is I have a responsibility to the people that are actually in my life. And, so the big thing that I do as far as volunteering, giving back, whatever, I do a good bit of volunteering with a boxing club that trains underprivileged kids to fight regardless of their ability to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you can judge me in whatever moral standing you want on, whether or not I'm doing something with my life in that. But I would say that like I have a responsibility there, and, what's my responsibility as far as like a concept here, apart from having this conversation, which a few thousand people will listen to, I don't know that I have any responsibility. I mean, any responsibility to anybody outside of the greater Kenosha, Wisconsin area. I mean, is that unfair or is that not?
Well, I think that the whole notion of, kind of what's your responsibility is one that, in America in particular is something that gets debated and contested quite a bit. It's interesting that a lot of my work, again, I said, doing it in comparative with other Western countries. And, it's a very, I won't say completely uniquely because there's some other countries that are the same way, but it's very much of like individual responsibility. Like I take care of myself, I take care of my family, and that's all I have a responsibility to versus like my responsibility as
and I'm not saying that. Like I'm not saying it's me and my family at all.
No, not at all. I'm just saying that's one extreme. I mean, that one extreme of the argument is like, all we have is it's me and I look out for myself and nothing else matters. And then sort of the other extreme, I think of, if we look at just sort of ideas in democracy, is like the kind of social welfare state that we all have a collective responsibility to take care of each other. And the U.S. sits, I think, closer to the individual side of that continuum. And I think there's there's a difference, I think, between our day-to-day responsibilities and then our citizen responsibilities and how much we as individuals can actually impact. And I think that's where a lot of this idea about, most people, as you said, most people probably won't come across a trans individual in their life. Or if they do, they probably won't realize it because the interaction will be so small that it'll be nothing more than like, passing on the street or, passing in a grocery store, not a real personal conversation, interaction. And so I think that we all, on the first hand, have a responsibility to impact what we can, where we can. And so whether that is, teaching kids to fight regardless of their socioeconomic status, whether it is doing maintenance on your trails because of the National Forest Service doesn't have the budget, so going out and making sure that trees that were knocked over during the winter are cleared out so people can go enjoy that, whether it's walking animals in the Humane Society, whether it is volunteering to teach music classes after school, that we have that our immediate impactful responsibility is yes to what is around us and what affects our day-to-day life and our standing and what we live and breathe and work in. And that's really the root of service. On a larger scale, our responsibility comes, you'd said not to, trample on the rights of others, which is absolutely correct, but it comes from a responsibility of ensuring that we are electing people who are going to go take those big policy fights and do it in such a way that they are supporting all Americans. And I think one of the most interesting, because I grew up in the pre-internet, pre-social media era, and now as an adult, I'm in the internet social media era. I find it very, and I come from a very politically active, or moderately, family. I guess, politically active family. Yeah, but I mean, but we had discussions about these things quite a bit, growing up. Is that I think the media is a blessing and a curse for bringing us together. On the one hand, we can have these conversations from states apart, and we can bring in people who have diverse views from states apart and have great conversations. On the other hand, we can highlight a lot of things about each other. And one of the side effects I've seen is that there seems increasingly to be this belief that somehow rights are zero sum. That if you give rights to somebody who didn't have rights before, it impacts your rights negatively if you had them already. You saw this argument around the same-sex marriage quite a bit. No, same-sex marriage. When same-sex marriage passed and it became accepted everywhere, mine and my husband's marriage was no less valid than it was the night before. We are just as married.
Yeah,
and
if I can jump in there for a second. I got super pissed off about because like marriage laws really came in to keep blacks and whites from marrying. And so, I got super pissed just because the county clerk was being a jerk when Amanda and I went in to get our marriage license. And I was like, screw this. Let's have the ceremony. But why do I have to give these people $40? I was livid. I was very, very angry about the way I was treated. And we decided, she felt really weird about that. So we did it. I would probably fall in the camp of like, there's what you say you believe and what you do. Right. And so what you do is really the only thing that
matters.
That matters. And so if like you're really against the gay marriage thing and you didn't go get your hetero marriage like dissolved, like in protest, right. I don't know if you really believe it.
Right. I feel very strongly the same way.
And that being said, for reasons apart from gay marriage, I just didn't screw that guy. I didn't want to cooperate with him just because I'm kind of hard headed and I was angry.
That's a perfectly, they can be, the whole legal institution of it, which was exactly designed to keep interracial marriages from happening.
Well, it was personal for me because I haven't had any contact with my dad in over a decade. He was abusive growing up. I just didn't want to put him on my on the certificate because I just didn't want to. And I grew up in this county of 14,000 people. We got married there, so they knew who I was. And they're like, "Well, you have to do this." I'm like, "I just don't want to put him down." And I was ready to walk out over it. And anyway, we did. We are legally, we legally
married
or whatever.
Yeah. But I think that there's this whole, again, I think most of these people who are so opposed to, the concept of transgendered individuals serving in the military are so opposed to same-sex marriage or are, so opposed to whatever, increasing voter rights, whatever it is. Most of them tend to be opposed out of fear, and it's because they're not going to encounter. They haven't ever encountered one, and most likely will never encounter an individual of this persuasion. And so there's some, and in social media and the internet and expansion allows, I think, the worst of any one group's stereotype to be blasted everywhere. With regards to the transgender issue, military issue right now, is that you see, Chelsea Manning got brought up again and again and again in this place. Like Chelsea Manning would be divisive regardless of whether or not she was trans because of what PFC Manning did. And that in no way speaks for
can I say that? Because maybe Private Manning was part of the leaked information, and then transitioned genders in prison and was pardoned, maybe partially because of maybe being killed in prison over transitioning or whatever. I would say that the main guy that leaked the stuff that Edward Snowden, I would put him in the and a lot of people would probably, who are more conservative leaning, would probably disagree with me that I would put him in the category of hero because I'm a constitutionalist and the government's not allowed to do what the government's not allowed to do. And if they're doing something illegal, you expose it. You're a hero in my book. I hope he maybe someday gets to come back to American soil. Chelsea Manning, Private Manning, whatever, has turned into such a whack job on Twitter of well, we should cancel the whole military and have free healthcare for everybody. Okay. Because nobody ever attacks anybody else. Why would we have a military?
We don't need a military at all.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm saying that individual, PFC Manning, is a divisive individual and not representative of trans people. And I think that's where some of this comes from, is that social media has given her this platform that she now, and because of her infamy, is out there and speaks to the masses. And for many people, that's the only trans voice they've ever heard. And so they immediately hear.
Wait, in a world with Caitlyn Jenner, that's the only person they've ever heard of?
In the military, I should say.
Okay,
In the military. Yes. Okay. There's a better way to. Yeah, I should have couched that. Yeah, I guess yes. Caitlyn Jenner, who also has a voice, which is okay.
So let me jump in here, and then I'm going to get to a couple quotes, and then we got to kind of wrap this thing because I want to put it out today.
Yeah.
So, I would say I didn't really come into this with much of a stance, and I had no idea where you were going to go. I still think about, like, as far as what is my role or my responsibility personally, and you can feel free to disagree with this, but I would compare it to there's an Inuit kid that has been getting, like, horribly, like actual death threats and stuff for killing a whale. He's in Alaska. He's a native. The entire village eats this whale. The kid went out and killed a whale in a little boat and drug this sucker in. And fed his whole village. And that idiot that has that, like, TV show Whale Wars or whatever is like, oh, well, this guy should die and all this stuff. I think that's horrible. And I am trying to get him on the podcast or get his family on the podcast. And, we'll see when the media thing dies down. But I would say I have just as much responsibility in that case as I do in the trans-military case, and that there's really nothing in the whole world that I'm going to do that's going to affect anything. I should try to, if I'm trying to do positive change in the world, I should first start with realizing I'm not that important, and I'm not Bono, and so I should try to help 30 kids here in town. And I'm pretty involved politically on the local level. I'm basically only involved politically on the local level. The mayor that we currently have in Kenosha is, like, the only time I've been a quote unquote, like, true believer. I'm like, this dude is so legit. So I'm involved in those two things. And, part of it I would say is I'm just not that important. And statistically Kenosha is 100,000 people. So statistically we may not have a trans person. So we're, like, you can respond to that and I'll throw a couple quotes at you and we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's, when you say you're not that important, I think that's a very interesting thing to say. I mean, to those 30 kids you might teach to fight, you might be the most important person in their world. And there's a chance that one of them, whether now or sometime in the future, may be a trans kid. And I'd say, what would your responsibility to do? Train him to fight the exact same way you train anybody else. And that's, really the end of it. And
I should say too, I mean, this podcast just costs 20,000 listens. And I am a film and TV critic for a magazine with, millions of hits online. Still, even though I actually do have a way broader voice than a lot of Americans, I'm speaking of things that matter as far as how we interact with culture, but nobody's looking to me to decide policy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. And so but some of it I think is to keep having with the podcast, for example, having these positive spaces for discussion without any sort of blame being placed on anyone is really important and something that's impactful. But I would say what our responsibility is, it is to with access to the information that we have, be informed about the information we have and the information that we share and spread, whether it's to 3 people or 3 million people. That's part of our responsibility as citizens, that because we have the freedom to speak freely, to criticize, to praise, to however that is, to make sure we're doing it from a place of accuracy. And I think, as you said, that's very important, is to be engaged at the local level, because that trickles up. And I think that this is something that is very unique about our American system, is that goods, bads, values, whatever, they trickle up much more than they trickle down. I mean, we have a president who takes to Twitter and tries to legislate via Twitter, but what's really going to matter, and circling back to the military side of this, what matters the most is the fact that those trans service members that we have the supports of their units. They have the supports of their chain of command. They've proven themselves to be competent and, in many cases, exceptional service members. And, their battle buddies know it.
I haven't said a lot here because I try to be really careful about speaking on the podcast unless I'm pretty well researched here. So that's why I said I didn't really come in with much of a stance. I had no idea where you're going to go. So there's a lot I'm going to leave, without any kind of opinion on here, because I just don't speak on stuff that I'm,
Mhm.
Like, I don't just throw out, like, this isn't talk radio. Like,
Which is very well appreciated.
yeah, there's no reason.
You're not gonna make-
Like, I don't have to be extreme to keep people through the commercial break. So, the whole concept of this is that, we find some common ground in America, again, across a very wide variety of, views and opinions, right? So I always try to, like, I call it like the love sandwich. I always try to, like, agree with somebody, like, get the common bond, and then, like, trouble the water a little bit, and whether or not, like, I agree with them, I try to have some kind of conflict, and then I try to land the plane.
Yep.
So, okay, I've never met a trans person. I have no opinion. I'm only going to throw things at you from the other side, to see how you do with it. Okay.
Okay.
What you do with it.
Yep.
So these are both veteran quotes that have gotten picked up by the news stuff. So, quote number one, before you bash Trump, this is why transgender people should not be in the military. It has nothing to do with hate or discrimination. As I have friends who are transgender, and I know and love and respect them. Most military positions require military members to be deployment ready, which actually you mentioned. Most of them actually don't. It's just mainly the Marines.
Yeah.
So, we can probably chop that down to maybe
we can couch that statement around deployment ready.
Okay, so we can say that Marines have to be, you can only respond to the Marines because, in a way, this isn't as applicable to the other branches. It's a logistics nightmare. Let me explain. You can't serve in the military if you have any medical conditions that require constant treatment or excessive accommodation, which is myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the food allergies. That's why people with asthma, diabetes, permanent STDs, STIs like HIV, people with cancer, recurring history of cancer, and individuals with physical disabilities can't serve except in very rare cases with specific waiver. Transgender individuals require hormone replacement therapy. They require psychiatric care during the transition, and if they elect to get surgery, it can take 2 to 4 years for them to recover to the point of being eligible to deploy. On top of that, after the surgery, they're at a higher risk of infection for the rest of their lives, which complicates any attempt at sending them into the field to train where hygiene isn't always as accessible. And overseas deployment also puts the individual at risk because they may not have steady access to their hormone replacement drugs, which leads to withdrawal and hormonal imbalances as well as health problems. So like diabetics and cancer patients and individuals with physical or mental disabilities, it isn't feasible to accommodate these people. So again, I don't know a lot there. That doesn't seem like a crazy whack job argument to me. So like, what do you do with that?
Okay, so I'll say it's not a crazy whack job argument, and I appreciate it's well reasoned. There is some misinformation still, I would say, in that quote. We'll start with the whole idea of surgery and readiness. So I think when he's talking about combat readiness or deployment readiness, it's that you can't have just been recovering from surgery. There are in the military, if you are to say break your leg, for example, to use something that happens, it's a high physical risk job regardless of a lot of jobs. You break your leg and you have to have surgery because you have a compound fracture, so you're in a cast. And so for say the 8 weeks you're on crutches, you're on a lighter limited duty. And then after that, you have to go through physical therapy. And so you're not deployable for a while, or you can't do your job and you're stuck in like a desk job and not able actually to go out and do your job for a while. So, I mean, this is something that happens all the time. There's his 2 to 4 years for any sort of reassignment surgery is, quite frankly, I have no idea where he got those numbers from the trans. I have one of my dearest friends is a male to female transgender Navy veteran, and she elected for all of the surgeries at various different. She had breast implants and she had the gender reassignment surgery. The longest she was ever medically down was 3.5 weeks.
Okay, so what happens? Do you get moved to another unit then?
She didn't. No, she didn't.
So what about sleeping arrangements or whatever? Don't males and females?
Yeah, well, she slept in she moved to the women's sleeping quarters. But like now that we have gender integrated service, everything is technically gender integrated in the Navy. She was on a ship. She just went to female birthing.
I don't know. I don't know that. So
yeah, and so so that's a little I think off. As so far as the not getting access to hormones, again, and this is coming from information from talking to several of the currently serving transgender members. there's a kind of misnomer that everything's going to fall apart if you stop taking hormones. The worst that actually really happens is that, if you're male to female, you might grow some facial hair back. And, if you're female to male, your voice might get a little higher. It doesn't, I'll use myself as actually a personal medical example. I'm not transgender, but I had breast cancer and had a double mastectomy as a result. And I stopped doing any sort of hormone replacement after, because my body does not naturally produce any more estrogen. Like it doesn't, as a result of the treatment I have to have. And I have not suffered any ill health effects afterwards. Otherwise, like I don't think I look like a man, because personally, I don't look anymore. About, you can see me, like podcast listeners can't, but so there's this. I think there's a lot of fear around hormones because we don't like to talk about them, but the overwhelming consequences are not dire. They're not going to die. They're not going to fall apart. The health risks aren't going to be that great. Their risk of infection after surgery is no different than your risk of infection after any other surgery. Whether it's you have your appendix taken out, should we stop sending all those people? Women who had C-sections who are service members, should they not be deployable anymore because they might get higher infections? So I think that there's these are rational arguments that need to be, again, discussed with some rationality. That let's actually talk to the and I'm not a medical professional, so I'll couch it that way. But from those I have seen, this hasn't been a huge issue. The military, he talks about not providing continual medical care, or any care that needs continual medication to serve, whatever we want to use for that. There are men who serve who have developed erectile dysfunction for a variety of different reasons in the military, whether it's an age issue, but more frequently because of the nature of military service, it has to do with environmental
combat or something
exposure,
like that.
Yeah, combat exposure linked to depression, and they have regular regimes of Viagra that they're given. And that's it's given as a regular maintenance to deal with their erectile dysfunction. Male service members can have vasectomies, which is completely elective, paid for by the DoD, and that's a gender-based elective surgery that requires downtime to recover from. And again, you need chain of command approval to make sure you do it during a time when it's not going to disrupt your unit operations. These are women get pregnant and get taken out for out of service while they're pregnant and after, and there hasn't been this huge call to ban women from service. There are maintenance drugs for service members who have PTSD in a variety of different ways. There are so I think that these are real considerations that need to be discussed with medical professionals and also with the service members and the chain of command, in ensuring that the mission comes first, mission readiness comes first. And I think that if you talk to the trans service members, they will say that if they choose to go forward with elective surgery, which I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that not all trans people in general go through full reassignment surgery, because the most important thing is to be recognized and accepted for your gender, more importantly than actually what genitals you might happen to have. The most common surgery that is done for trans individuals across the board is the female to male trans members getting mastectomies to have their boobs taken away, because that's kind of like the biggest barrier to being able to be seen as male. And I mean, myself, when I had one, I was out riding mountain bikes in Moab less than a month after I had mine. And that was for kind of more serious medical reasons. I wasn't fully healthy. So I think that there's some exaggeration with how long some of these things are going to take. And then also I think we need to recognize that, nobody joined, well, I would say nobody, very few people join the military because they want to like get plastic surgery or get, I think it would be the same as if you asked a male service member, like, did you join to get a free mastectomy? Or free vasectomy, not mastectomy. Did you join to get your free vasectomy here?
Yeah.
Because that's a benefit that's offered, and it's not there's very, very few, and I won't say no because again I'm not a medical provider, but very, very few medical reasons why any man would need a vasectomy. That's an elective. The vast majority of the time it's elective procedure, and there isn't an outcry over that happening for male service members. So we can even make arguments, I think, around that that pregnancy is a voluntary thing in America in these days and age. Like it's your choice to go through with it. We provide medical care and the all the follow-on care and the maintenance, any sort of follow-on medical maintenance that's going to have to happen post-pregnancy. It's part of serving the whole service member and the whole soldier.
Okay.
For that.
One more, and this one's a little rougher. I'm going to throw one
right.
more at you. And again, I'm just the messenger here.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, so this is actually from a guy that he said he's not doing any media stuff. So he actually looks to be like just a few miles from me here in Wisconsin. Okay. And let me preface this by saying, especially with the John McCain thing, going on, that the guy's got brain cancer. If you want a guy who was tortured in Vietnam for years and could have left and didn't because he wouldn't leave his men, if you want him to die of cancer because you don't like his policies, you're a really screwed up person.
Yeah, that's a little crazy.
So
that's
but we're seeing all this stuff on Twitter. So
right,
I'll say
completely nuts.
Whatever anybody thinks of because this is pretty divisive. Whatever anybody thinks of this guy, his name is J.R. Salzman. Looks to be it's called neighbors again. He might be my actual neighbor within 20 miles or so here. I'm just gonna read his tweets in paragraph form. Okay. I served and by the way, he lost a finger on one hand, a full arm on the other. So whatever you think of the guy, he paid the price.
Yep.
I served in Iraq in 2006. For the first 5 months, I was on a 12-man fire base out in the middle of nowhere in the desert. Every day was Groundhog Day. Wake up and do the same patrols, same shift every single day. It was so damn hot, 150 degrees in the gun trucks. Tracer fires would go overhead occasionally at night. IEDs on the road were a daily threat. We were supplied with food every 8 days. The stress of being out there doing the same job every single day eats away at you. The younger guys had problems with that over time. Any tiny little personal issue had suddenly become a mountain. And that came out on the fire base. They snapped mentally. Guys would literally snap over a Dear John letter. Their personal issues came out and they were instantly combat ineffective. Now take one confused about whether they're a man or a woman. Take psychological and emotional issues and put them in that environment. Take someone who's right off the bat not in uniform or part of the same team. Give them special treatment because of their identity. Take that person and put them in a stressful war environment and see what happens. It's a time bomb. You have to be incredibly tough physically, mentally, and emotionally. War is not a video game. It tests every ounce of your being. You can't teach someone to be a fearless warrior in a PowerPoint. You either have it or you don't. You can hack it or you can't. And then did I get to the end of it? And if you don't, you'll just get people killed needlessly. Political correctness has absolutely no place in the military.
Okay, so I would actually say there's much in that I agree with, and there are a few very key points I disagree with. I completely agree that war, especially, and I'd say more than anything, the monotony of war takes its toll on people, on individuals, on units. I mean, our squadron during one deployment that wasn't particularly exciting, like we started to get into fistfights with each other, and throw things at each other and try to because we were like, we're going crazy here. So I think that's something that's very, very real, and you can't just teach PowerPoint to people to make them good, good soldiers, sailors, Marines. All of that I 100% agree with. What I fundamentally disagree with is first his characterization of trans individuals as somehow being confused and or mentally unstable. Some are, sure. There are some straight people who are confused and or mentally unstable who can make it through military training as well. There's, again, being trans doesn't mean you are confused as to whether or not you are male or female. It means that your gender identity does not conform with your sexual biology that you were born with. I would say when you talk to most trans, especially most trans adults, there's not a lot of confusion. They know. So I think that's something that I take great issue with, that there is a trans individual is no more or less likely to be able to handle both the stress of combat or the stress of monotony of war than a cis individual would be my comeback to that. And then I think that if I also don't see any trans individuals asking for special accommodations or being in different uniforms or having anything different. And I think a lot of these were the exact same arguments that were made around women when women started to integrate into, you saw it at first when women started to integrate into combat aviation. And I think that's where some of the most famous, quotes from this line of thinking come, where women integrated into combat aviation right on the heels of tailhook. And so there was, the tailhook scandal, which, where famously a bunch of naval aviators assaulted and accosted women. There was this other, women are never going to be able to make it. Women are going to get eaten alive. It's not going to work. Women showed up and were professional. They were technically and tactically competent, and they did their job. And because they were technically and tactically competent individuals, they made their units better. Because if you look at any of the psychological studies as to how unit cohesion is actually built, it's not built around being the same as each other. It's built around having to go do hard stuff together. So, I guarantee you on that 12-man fire base, like they were all working together long before they deployed to prepare for that mission. If one of the individuals that was there happened to be trans, that individual would have gone through the exact same training as the rest of the group. And that's where their cohesion would have been built around. And I agree that it's hard and it's stressful, but it's hard and it's stressful whether you're trans or not. And it's really up to you. Today, when we have an all volunteer force, individuals get to make the choice whether or not to serve.
They go.
And I think a big thing is recruiters being honest about what people are getting into. But if a trans individual doesn't feel that is an appropriate environment for them to be in, they probably shouldn't choose to go into the military and serve. Same thing. Like I know a lot of cisgendered heterosexual males who would have been horrible in the military as macho and as strong, Division I football players who would not have been good in the military, despite the fact that they're, big, tough, manly men.
Well, can we wrap on that?
Yeah.
Because I do want to get this thing out into the world. I'm curious, and we'll go back to my personal story. So, there's this argument that we should have an average sized force. So, I was already double disqualified, peanut allergy, extra rib. Would you abandon me? I mean, is being
for your size?
Yeah. Would you abandon me? I'm curious.
No, I wouldn't have. I think that there's some no, I wouldn't have banned you at all. I think that this is where it also, and banding is one of the things that I think is an interesting term too. There are, I think for every occupational specialty in the military, there should be gender neutral, sexual orientation neutral, identity neutral standards that you have to meet. And those standards need to be based on what is entailed to do the job. I don't know the exact specifications, but you might be physically not qualified to serve in submarines because you might just be too big to fit in the bed that they have there.
For the record, though, throughout most of human history, if you ask, a general commander, like, hey, do you want somebody that's bigger than everybody else to go kill people for you? Usually people like me are kind of cool.
Yeah, they are.
I find it to be interesting.
But I think that if you can meet the standards, go for it. Awesome. But that's why we need, I think, completely neutral, occupationally based standard, and saying what is it that we have to do this job to win our wars? Because the purpose of the military is to win wars, and by that encompasses a lot. It's not just shoot people, but it's actually deliver our best interest and our political objectives at the times when political violence is necessary to do those things overseas.
But if you don't shoot people, you wind up being France and just getting trampled on for centuries.
It's really funny. Like one of my dissertation case studies is on France. So
Okay, well, we're really wrapping up on this, but I was just thinking about like, cost savings in the military and stuff. I was thinking about the fact that like we're still in Germany and stuff, and I'm like, okay, first of all, that area is really stable, so that seems like maybe not the most strategic place to spend money. Second of all, I just kind of feel like whoever breaks France next can just have them. Like, my great uncle killed Nazis there, and I had family.
I'll take it. I'd love to live in France right now.
Well, what you need to get 12 Eagle Scouts.
There we go.
I think you can.
I mean, all I want is like their champagne and their brie. So, I mean, that's really like all the spoils that I'm caring about being there.
Okay, so I'm going to come back and read an essay now, and I didn't use this last night just because I actually don't think it was out or I hadn't seen it online or something like that. But it wasn't intentional to not give Kyleann an opportunity to respond. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and actually put this in the show notes as well. It comes from the Daily Signal, and it's from actually a soldier who regrets the transgender journey. And I'm just going to read it. You can read it yourself if you'd rather turn it off and do that. But I know that a lot of people listen to this in the car and when you're doing other stuff, so you may not have time to read it. Walt Heyer is an author and public speaker, and he runs the website sexchangeregret.com. All right, so let me just kind of give you the highlights here. I think that he, meaning Donald Trump, made the right decision. As someone who lived as a trans female for several years now, I should know. When I discovered Congress voted earlier this month not to block funding for transgender-related hormone therapies and sex change surgeries, I wondered if it considered how devastating this would be on the fitness, readiness, and morale of our combat-ready troops. In July, the House of Representatives voted down Missouri Republican Representative Vicky Hartzler's amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have banned the military from funding such treatments. Paying for transition-related surgeries for military service members and their families is beyond comprehensible. Perhaps they've forgotten that our military was forged to be the world's greatest fighting force, not a government-funded, politically correct medical sex change clinic for people with gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria, the common diagnosis for someone who feels at odds with his or her birth gender, developed from prolonged anxiety and depression. People are not born that way. The proof for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria is having strongly held feelings, but feelings can and often do change over time. The military is expected to prepare its members for warfare, to kill, destroy, and break our enemies. The most important factors in preparing a strong military are not hormone therapy, surgical sex change, or politically correct education. We need psychologically fit, emotionally sound, highly trained troops to protect our nation from its enemies. While countless homeless vets are currently sleeping under cardboard boxes or waiting for life-changing care from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we learn that transgender military recruits now qualify for presidential or preferential coverage for sex change procedures that are scientifically unproven and extremely costly. I myself am fully sex reassigned from male to female, and eventually came to accept my birth gender. I have over 70 years of firsthand experience, 8 years living as a woman, 20 years of researching the topic, and 12 years of helping others who, like me, found that transitioning and reassignment surgery failed to be proper treatment to restore their lives to their birth gender, and want to restore their lives to their birth gender. I bring that in just because, the veteran from Wisconsin that I quoted off of Twitter was, not somebody who was within the trans experience. And so I thought I'd throw out one more credible, source here. Whether or not you disagree with this person or whether you agree with them, you can't deny that this is somebody from within the community and this is a perspective. And if you're like, oh, well, you just wanted to come back and have the last line here. I really didn't. I'm not going to say anything maybe ever on this topic, and if I do, it'll be several weeks because I like to be well thought out, and I don't think you can do that in 24 hours. Hey, thanks for hanging with me. If you like the show or if you hate it, if you want to go ahead and throw me a review over on iTunes, just be honest, wherever you feel like you're at. This thing where you're trying to bring unity is not something that's going to get a ton of press, and I'm humbled at the rate this thing has grown over the first 10 weeks of its existence. But if you can help out in any way, whether it's sharing it on social media, actually telling somebody about it, or leaving that review, I believe that you're helping a little tiny cause that hopefully brings some unity again. Hey, can't give too many specifics, but the next episode, which may come out on Saturday or it may come out early next week, has to do with this yoga teacher getting shot in Minneapolis. And I've actually got another Marine, so like 3 out of 26 guests have been Marines so far, is going to talk about, if you shoot somebody like some of these police shootings have gone down and you're a soldier and not a police officer, you wind up getting court-martialed. So that's either going to happen Saturday or Monday. Thanks for hanging with me. Hey, again, seriously, you're the only reason this happens. So thank you for hanging with me.